Delusion, Love of Fantasy versus Reality, and this video is part of the Spiritual Problems series by Dr. Lisa Love. So this video is part of what I call the 4 Ds, which are 4 problems that are talked about in the book Esoteric Psychology Volume 2, written primarily for what Alice Bailey calls Group 7 probationary disciples. And there we learn about the 4 Ds, which we explored 1 already, devitalization, pursuing spirituality in an impractical way. This video has to do with delusion, or the love of fantasy versus reality, and I almost called it the unreal versus the real, but we'll see that fantasy has a kind of reality of itself, so I called it love of fantasy versus reality. Then she talks about delirium, and I called it fanatical obsession with one's view of spirituality. And she talks about detachment, which I called the misguided withdrawal from the world. And if you want, you can read more about these in Esoteric Psychology Volume 2, pages 598 to 607. And again, as a reminder for those who watch the Soul to Spirit YouTube channel, spiritual growth does not happen in a step-by-step manner. It's like a game of chutes and ladders, drawn from the older game known as Snakes and Ladders, where we go up and down in our spiritual growth because we may be going along one particular level, and we may suddenly jump up, and then we may suddenly go down again. So, for example, we go up here, and then we go from 14, 15, 16, find out that we didn't do so well when we were down here, and we have to go back and repeat some of these steps that we missed. Now that can also happen if we're, let's say, on level 1, 2, 3, there's like 10 levels in this Chutes of Ladder game, and we have some sort of mystical state experience, and we jump all the way up here, and we think now we're really enlightened, but then we don't know that we've missed a whole lot of developmental stages. So when we go along a few more steps, we have to go down again and clean things up. In fact, we may actually be further behind, here's number 24, than we were at number 28. So it's important to understand that spiritual progress is never even. Most of us have some spiritual problems of some kind, and it's up to us to recognize what they are and to go back and fill in the gaps. We might also want to be careful with certain spiritual teachers who we expect to be perfect in all ways. They may have gaps or cleavages in development as well, and we need to be on the lookout for them. And that doesn't discount that they may be really developed in some areas. They just may have some gaps like all of us do. Aware of this, let's explore the second difficulty Bailey conveys that causes a gap in our spiritual development, primarily again for Group 7 probationary disciples, known as delusion. Bailey claims those stuck in delusion reside in their astral bodies or emotional bodies and are caught up with their vision or thought form of being in touch with the divine, mistaking what she says is, quote, the symbol for the reality, end of quote. She goes on to give examples of delusion, saying how, quote, all couch their desire and longing in the same symbolic forms: marriage with the beloved, life in the holy city, participation in some ecstatic vision of God, adoration of some deified and loved individuality, such as the Christ, the Buddha, or Sri Krishna, walking in the garden of life, the garden of the Lord, the attainment of the mountaintop where God is to be found, and all stands revealed, end of quote. Then she goes on to state later, quote, these ideas exist as powerful thought forms on the astral plane, and they attract like magnets the aspiration of the devotee who follows century after century the same path of yearning, search, imaginative expression of a deep-seated spiritual wish life and an emotional surging outwards towards divinity, described sometimes as the lifting of the heart to God. And that comes from Esoteric Psychology Volume 2, pages 600 to 602. She also tells us that, and note, this quote was written before people were sensitive to gender-inclusive pronouns. Everyone was a he about 100 years ago, 80, 90 years ago. So she tells us that someone with delusion is, quote, deluded by the best that is in him. He is the victim of a hallucination which embodies the highest he knows. He is overcome by the glamour of the spiritual life. He fails to distinguish between the vision and the plan, between the manufactured unreal of the ages of mystical activity and the real, which stands ever in the background of the life of the integrated human being. And that's on page 601. And finally, she adds, quote, when in these modern times the mystically oriented person comes under the care of the wise psychologist, the latter would be well advised gently and gradually to develop in him a cycle of doubt, leading even to a temporary agnosticism. The result would be a rapid establishing of the desired equilibrium. I would call your attention to the words gently and gradually. The encouraging of a normal physical life with its ordinary interest, the fulfilling of its obligations and responsibilities, and the usual physical functioning of the nature would bring about much wholesome and needed orientation, and that is on page 602. She also tells us that, and note, this quote was written before people were sensitive to gender-inclusive pronouns. Everyone was a he about 100 years ago, 80, 90 years ago. So she tells us that someone with delusion is, quote, deluded by the best that is in him. He is the victim of a hallucination which embodies the highest he knows. He is overcome by the glamour of the spiritual life. He fails to distinguish between the vision and the plan, between the manufactured unreal of the ages of mystical activity and the real, which stands ever in the background of the life of the integrated human being. And that's on page 601. And finally, she adds, quote, when in these modern times the mystically oriented person comes under the care of the wise psychologist, the latter would be well advised gently and gradually to develop in him a cycle of doubt, leading even to a temporary agnosticism. The result would be a rapid establishing of the desired equilibrium. I would call your attention to the words gently and gradually. The encouraging of a normal physical life with its ordinary interest, the fulfilling of its obligations and responsibilities, and the usual physical functioning of the nature would bring about much wholesome and needed orientation, and that is on page 602. So what are we to make of these words? Are we then to assume that all visions mystics have had through the ages are just hallucinations? Should all mystical phenomena be viewed in a materialistic light as simply some disordered experience of the brain? I, for one, don't believe that is what Bailey is implying, especially since she herself was having what some might call mystical phenomena by claiming to be telepathically receiving her teachings from some Tibetan a continent away. What does she mean then? For starters, Bailey says these mystical visions take place in the astral body, meaning they are associated with the astral or emotional plane. The astral plane is full of images, sounds, visions, and dreams, which mystics and those having near-death experiences contact. But just like the physical plane, visions on the astral or emotional plane are real. The problem of these two planes, physical and astral, is that they are not the real. They are an aspect or fragment of reality itself, which is why they might be called the unreal compared to the real. So just like we don't want to get stuck in the physical plane, we don't want to get stuck in the astral plane, or we will become deluded that we have reached reality when we haven't. Look at it this way. Someone stuck in delusion is like someone who wants to get to the top of Mount Everest. But during the climb, that person stops the ascent at Base Camp 2, thinking they've arrived at the top. Well, why did they stop at Base Camp 2? Because in the increasingly rarefied air, they became more receptive to other dimensions and had a vision that started to enthrall them. Caught by that vision, they lost sight of the fact that there is much more to reality than what they were experiencing right now at Base Camp 2. That's the problem. We get stuck here, and that's why we're in delusion. But why is it dangerous to be stuck on the astral plane? I mean, so what? Who cares? Well, we care because if we don't continue to move up to the mental, buddhic, and atmic planes, we will give too much importance to astral plane phenomena, what the integral community calls state experiences. I like that word state, so I threw it in here. Which means we start to get addicted to experiencing astral plane visions or highs, and we may even describe spirituality as like that, which is basically no different than being an addict, whether it's addicted to drugs or it's addicted to mystical experiences or visions. We might also lack an understanding of how to interpret this kind of phenomena. For example, the picture here is a real photo of a cloud. The materialist looking at the photo would just see the cloud and discount any meaning or significance associated with it, unless they want to give it a scientific explanation of how such a cloud might come about. The mystic is more inclined to give meaning and significance to the cloud, such as seeing it as a light being or an angel. But here's the problem. They're putting too much importance on that. This is where doubt, as Bailey says, is important when evaluating mystical experiences. Now, doubt does not mean discounting the experience or seeing it as wrong. Doubt means evaluating the mystical phenomena through the mental body so that it can be viewed in a more detached, less emotionally biased way. I'm reminded of a mystical experience in my life, and I've had a number, but this is one when I was a child. I'd hit my head in a fall and suffered a concussion. As my mother drove me to the hospital, I kept telling her, "I see Jesus. I see Jesus." Now, I was having visions of Jesus. To this day, there is no doubt in my mind that is what I saw. But what kind of meaning do I assign to that experience? As a child, I felt Jesus had appeared to tell me I would be all right. As an adult, after I went through some agnosticism and was exposed to neurobiology and other religions, I came to believe that my brain injury had opened me up to perceiving things at another level. I also realized that because I was raised Christian, the image of comfort I saw was Jesus, not Buddha, Krishna, or some other being. But does this mean I think my experience was not real? No, it was. I have just put it into a larger context, which is what I believe we are meant to do. I am also lucky that the people around me did not make a big deal out of statements of me seeing Jesus. I say lucky because some people who have mystical visions are put on or put themselves on a pedestal, leading to delusion, where too much importance is put on mystical visions and episodes. Making too much out of mystical phenomena is something Group 7 probationary disciples have to be careful of, because they are more inclined to be open to other realms through an increased sensitivity, a desire to experiment with drugs, and entering into mystical episodes through meditative practices. Spirituality becomes about having experiences. Without realizing it, the individual can retreat inside themselves and move away from service in the world as the focus shifts to what might even become an addiction to staying high. When the spiritual path is more about the plan than visions, we may still have mystical experiences, but they're not the focus. They're no longer actively cultivated. We also recognize that as more people move on to the spiritual path, mystical experiences will become commonplace. That means we are also less inclined to make ourselves out to be special when we have these experiences. We will also become more curious and realistic about what these phenomena represent and see how they are frequently colored by religious and cultural conditioning. Now, I was focusing on Group 7 probationers here, and while I was doing that, I realized that those in Groups 3, 4, and 5 that still have some magical or mythological thinking may make a big deal out of those who have mystical experiences, especially Group 7 probationers. And we'll see in later videos on spiritual problems that this is a trap that Group 7 probationers can fall into. They have a mystical experience, they put themselves on a pedestal, and they get people that don't have much mental body developed to follow them and worship them and make a lot out of them. And that is something that we'll talk about in later videos as an even more severe problem than delusion. Which brings me back to Bailey's emphasis on focusing on the plan instead of having visions. The plan, as the Bailey books refer to it, involves using the mental body on the mental plane and the intuition on the Buddhic plane to cultivate a deeper understanding of human, planetary, and you might even want to say cosmic evolution. Understanding what that plan is and learning to serve it so that we can uplift humanity and contribute to the well-being of our planet is not as fun, fascinating, or entertaining as having visions or mystical experiences. Serving the plan can be hard work. Learning to keep your balance and spiritual equanimity, your Sat Chidananda represented by the triad in the Bailey model, while serving that plan is essential. Visions may help give guidance or confirm that your understanding and service to the plan is on the right track. They may also send you on the wrong track and delude you. But for the most part, these mystical visions and experiences, they do not benefit the plan as a whole. They don't really benefit people around you. They might even contribute to you dropping out of active service to others and letting the affairs of the world or those you're meant to serve decline while you remain surrounded in an astral world haze of some sort. And living in an astral, mystical, or drug-like induced haze is essentially what delusion is all about. In summary, mystical visions and experiences, they're not to be demeaned or discounted. They have their place. They can inspire, uplift, and lead one into dimensions that exist beyond the physical world. But if we are to avoid delusion, we need to avoid making too much of these experiences. We also need to put these mystical episodes or state experiences into their proper context. The way out is to keep going and to see mystical experiences as only a step along the way so we do not get sidetracked and we continue to move forward to discover the real. Bailey echoes this when she states, quote, "The true and valuable fruits of the mystical experience of the past are never lost." Notice she says true and valuable fruits. Going on with her quote, "The inner spiritual realization remains that we got from some mystical episodes," going back to her quote, "latent in the context of the life, later to be resurrected to its true expression. But the vagueness," that's very important, the vagueness, the sense of duality, me here, the vision over there, me here, God over there, must eventually be transformed into a realized mental clarity. Dualism must give place to the experience of the at-one-ment, and the mist must roll away. The mystic sees through a glass darkly, but must someday know, even as he is known. That's the top of Mount Everest that we want to get to. Knowing requires moving farther along the path, which is what the mystic is encouraged to do. Mystical visions and state experiences, they may continue. Their fruits are not lost, but they are seen as just a stage in spiritual development. Avoiding delusion, farther along the way we go. Thanks for watching, and we'll continue this Spiritual Problems series, and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you want to learn more about when they're released. And as usual, I want to encourage you to become a patron, as well as visit the website soultospirit.com And if you enjoy the YouTube channel, again, subscribe, like, comment, share, and most of all, thanks for watching.